So as we move through this, it's interactive. As you've already experienced, have questions, have thoughts, put them in the chat box. We're a small group, go unmute, just speak into the room. If there's something that is moving you, most likely, or you have a question, most likely other people do as well. So please, as we move through this, let's make this a conversation, right? As much as my sharing of information. I do want to say that everything that I'm sharing with you here about building self-esteem was not only learned through various certifications and my degree, but is also hard-earned on my own, because I literally had no self-esteem. It took me decades to come to a place where I really, truly appreciated myself and loved myself. So it was a long, hard slog. I know from whence I speak. All right. So first of all, intention. Dixie had already mentioned, how do you want to leave today? What experience would you like to give to yourself as we walk through this? So maybe just take a couple seconds, go within and decide that for yourself. You're not going to share it with anyone, just for yourself. What experience do you want to give yourself as we walk through this today? And setting that intention wherever we are, whatever we're doing, professionally or personally, is a really powerful thing. It sets the framework for your energy and for others as well. So thank you for that. All right, we're going to start interestingly today, right? We ended with celebrations with Dixie. Today, we're going to start with what you do not do well. All right, something that you're all, I'm sure, good at sharing. Now, this is a this is a fun picture. I'll share it briefly. Something I do not do well is climb trees. This is a professional tree climber. His name is Rowan. And I took a course on tree climbing, and I was cracking up here because he kept saying, just put your foot here, just put your arm there, just do this. And I said, Rowan, forget the just. It's not happening. Everything here is challenging for me. So I'm going to invite you to take a moment and in the chat box, just make a flurry of things that you believe you don't do well. You don't do well. And just unload. You can do multiple things. You can make a list. You can, as it pops in your mind, just blah, 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 blah. Go ahead and put those out there. Let's see if I can see my chat. There we go. Spreadsheets cook. Directions killing bugs. Very good. What else? What don't you do well? Authority. Thanks, Helena. Sports. Christy, very good. What else?
We also got ride a bike and exercise.
Oh, missed that one. Thank you, Beth. Personal care, taking a bath to relax instead of a shower in a rush. Very good, Angel. Julie, cold calls. Now, these may be the ones you feel comfortable typing in the chat box, but when you're talking to yourself, you're talking to your family members, talking to your best friend, think of all those things that you say, oh, God, I just suck at, right? The list can go on, and we do it all day long. We don't even notice it, right? So don't suffer fools well, don't take direction well, not good at losing weight. Thank you, Dan. Good list. All right. So we have been trained to look at what we don't do well. It's often second nature. And even if it takes us a moment to think in putting in a list like this, it's there for us consistently, right? We have groomed, I'm going to say, a way of not esteeming ourselves. And so we're going to take that apart a little bit. Nope, here we go. Let's look first at the definition of self-esteem. First definition is it's one's personal evaluation of their own worth as a human being, personal evaluation, and how capable, important, successful, and valuable one believes oneself to be. How capable, important, successful, and valuable. And I want to put an emphasis on important and valuable, because especially as leaders, and whether it's our family we're leading, a corporation we're leading, a project we're leading, a group that we're leading, if we don't find ourselves valuable, if we don't hold ourselves as valuable and important to bring ourselves to this experience, we're not going to be able to lead. We're not showing up in our full selves. Okay? Oh, wait a minute. Why is this not? Hold on a second. There we go. Treat people as if they were what they ought to be, and you help them become what they are capable of being. That is Wolfgang von Goethe. I'm hoping that'll come on. There we go. My mouse wasn't working. Okay. So everything I'm sharing here goes for ourselves, how we treat ourselves, right? So if we are always talking ourselves down, if we are always putting emphasis on the things we haven't accomplished well, or we just missed the mark, or we do something really great, but gosh, if we'd have just done a little bit differently than XYZ, right? Where we diminish our value or what we have done in the world, we then are actually living into that consistently. Does that make sense? So when we esteem ourselves, we actually are giving ourselves a framework that we can grow into and live from. Helena, you have a question, please.
Oh, and you'll need to unmute, dear.
You're muted.
That's better then. I have a little bit of an issue with that because I'm a nitpicker. That's what I do well.
Go ahead.
Treat people as if they were what they ought to be. And it feels like, how do I know what somebody else ought to be? And then help them to become what they are capable of being. That to me seems like a big order. And how do you evaluate that? Or are you teaching us how to do that?
Well, so two things. First of all, he's addressing others, right? He's addressing if you first. So let's say, for example, you have an apprentice, and this person comes into your organization, doesn't have a lot of experience, maybe makes mistakes, doesn't know how to do certain things, and you recognize this. When you go to the place of treating them as someone who's capable, who can actually do the job that they came in to do, and that you see the mistakes, but you speak to them and you work with them from the place of where you already know they can achieve. That gives them the space, not only motivation, but the energetic framework to move into being that in the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so basically you groom them, you see their potential, and you groom them accordingly.
It's not so much grooming in my experience, and I just want to make mention, Dixie, we have Sarah in the waiting room, but I can't do it with my mouse. Grooming is part of mentoring, absolutely. But what he's speaking about, and what I'm speaking about in regard to ourselves, is knowing you already are that which you think you need to become. Right? So there's not an arc of I have to get there. So this quote is in reference to yourself. When you treat yourself as though you already are what you so want to be, then you have a much easier time living into and from that place. If you come from the place of, gosh, I have to change this, I have to get better at presentations, I have to learn how to communicate better, you're here and you know you have to get over there, then you're always here having to get over there. If you are in a place of knowing, you have all of the capacity and ability and desire to do that way, to communicate, to lead, whatever it is that you're moving toward. You already have that capacity. When you hold that framework for yourself, it is immensely easier to actually manifest that. Because things that we want, here comes the consciousness piece, things that we want to experience and see in the world already exist in the ether. Or we wouldn't have the idea.
Right.
So actually acting as though that is so makes it a lot easier for that to manifest in the world. Now that's kind of a other level. Does that make sense?
Yep. Thanks.
Any other questions on that?
So Lisa, for me, the thing where this most hits my heart is how we choose to treat our children. If we have high expectation for them, if we can put the scaffolding in place, not to do for them, but to assist, then they can do amazing things. And yet we have a whole generation of parents who go, you're not good enough, you won't amount to anything, why can't you be more like your brother or sister? And all of those things take our esteem away.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's really, it's seeing for me that potential inside. I don't have to know specifically what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I have to know that they're here for something that's greater than maybe is showing up.
Beautifully said, Dan. You don't need to know the specifics. It's really a state of mind. Dixie asked, but when you came in, what is your state of being, right? So it's really that state of being that you put yourself in. That's why we start out with an intention. That's why my definition of leadership is knowing and owning that highest place in myself, because then when I do that, I will recognize and tap into that in others. And that there's not a better way to lead than that. And it's wonderful that you also speak to comparison, because we're going to get right into the bones of that. So thank you. All right. I want to tell you a story about Michelle. So I'm an executive coach, and I work with a lot of, I work with entrepreneurs and small businesses, but I also work with leaders of large corporations. And actually, I need to go out of here so I can see you. There we go. Then we're going to go back. So Michelle is the CEO of a very large shoe company, and her family has had this company for decades, like I think 2 generations. She's the 3rd generation. And she went to Fashion Institute of Technology, one of the leading fashion educations in the world in New York, and came out, but did not work in the family business, worked elsewhere doing online marketing for a fashion company. So her father, the then CEO of the company, asked her to please go to Dublin and work at a subsidiary that they had over there. This is a global organization. She was 25 years old, so she did. And she worked there, and her dad would have conversations, and he kept asking her very interesting questions that she didn't quite understand. It turned out then at some point that her father had suspicions about someone who was actually in a VP position in that particular subsidiary. Long story short, that person had been embezzling money and stealing product by forging or basically stealing their design and putting different labels on it and selling it on the side. Now, Michelle was 25 years old. Her father had sent her in this situation. She didn't know anything about it. She ended up then reporting what she could. The subsidiary actually was closed, and they gave the licensing to another business in the European Union. The interesting thing now is that was 15 years ago. So Michelle contacted me because she struggles to make decisions. She doesn't trust herself. She's the head of this huge corporation that has skyrocketed under her tutelage, right? All for creativity and everything else. However, she doesn't really believe in herself. And it was through this conversation, one of our first conversations, that this story came out. And what I said to her was, if I told you this story about a 25-year-old woman who had never worked in this particular organization, sent overseas for the first time to work in a company and to be more or less a spy, where people had been embezzling and committing fraud for decades, really, and she didn't know about it, what would you say? She was like, wow, I never thought of it that way. I said, you were put in an untenable situation. So that was the root of her not trusting herself. She came back, her father passed, she ended up becoming CEO of the organization at 30, and she's done a great job. But this whole time, she has distrusted herself because of that situation where she was put in circumstances which nobody could have dealt with at all, right? So that experience, or all experiences that we have historically, they walk with us. They continue unless we take a look at them, and that's what we're going to do. And so whether you are an entrepreneur, small business owner, leader of a team, or you have a large corporation that you're running, these situations live within us. They don't just go away. They're there. So that's why I'm doing this with us today and doing this work. Are there any questions on that or comments on that story?
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
I would say that those patterns don't start when you're 25. She has lived with that father her entire life. Like, what has he put her through in similar situations, patterns? It's like, whoa, of course you don't.
Absolutely, Monica, that's true. And it's a patterning. It's a patterning. What was interesting though is that was such a clear scenario of how could you possibly have any luck or chance of success in that situation, right? Which shone the light on her current standing of, I don't trust myself in making decisions, right? So whether we go back to childhood, early career, family, what have you. Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. Okay. Let's go back to the screen share here. Use, there we go. All right. All right. So I'm going to give you an opportunity in the chat box again on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being you adore yourself. You know your value. And I'm not talking about arrogance. I'm not talking about boastfulness. I'm talking about really loving and valuing who you are as you are in the world. That's a 10. A 1 is you think that anybody on the planet is better at doing anything than you are. Where would you put yourself between 1 and 10? Just throw out some numbers there. Hold on a second. There you go. Now I can see my chat box. There it is. I couldn't see the chat box. Okay. What do we have here? 5, 10 certain days, 3 others, 7, 8, 8, 7, 8.5, 7. Very good. All right. Well, that's nice to hear. And we've got that much going on, and it's not going to let me. There we go. All right. Okay. And that, in German, I'd say schwanken, that swinging between high and low, that happens. But we kind of have a baseline of how we esteem ourselves. So let's look at it. High self-esteem is if you trust yourself. You trust your decisions. You learn from your mistakes. You speak, that's supposed to be courteously to yourself. You could also be curious with yourself, but you're courteous, right? You're kind. You have positive self-talk. You hold healthy boundaries. You do not accept poor treatment. And I am going to point out, especially women or minorities, this is a norm that we have learned to accept poor treatment. So you don't, if you esteem yourself, you won't accept it. No, it's not working with me. Sorry. Why is that not? There we go. There we go. I'm not going to use my mouse. My mouse is not working. Okay, acknowledge your accomplishments and you accept other people's points of view. Okay, so these are all indicators of high self-esteem. On the other side of that, low self-esteem, we're busy with self-doubt. We make a decision, but God, I'm not sure. Is that the right thing? Nah. We berate ourselves for mistakes rather than learning from them. We can't get over it. We have negative or derogatory self-talk. We don't speak up for ourselves and we don't self-advocate. We stay silent when we're mistreated. We play down and disregard our successes. And a lot of us know that, oh, it wasn't that big of a thing. No, that's because I have a special team. Oh, it's only because of, right? And we argue with other people's points of view. They may not like what we're doing. They may take exception to something that we're putting out into the world. And we argue with that rather than respecting that's their point of view. They have input, we can learn from it, and we can leave it with them. Any comments on this interface of low and high? Obviously, there's many other facets to it. Any other comments? No? Okay. All right. Dixie, there's someone, it looks like there's somebody else in the waiting room. Oh, and it's not interesting. There we
Got
go.
it. It just takes them a minute to actually join after I click.
Okay, no worries. It's funny when it's in play, I don't have the functionality of my mouse, so thank you. Okay. All right. The deepest fear we have, the fear beneath all fears, is the fear of not measuring up, the fear of judgment. It holds us back, it holds us down, It directs us in life. And for those of you who have not yet done it, I invite you to the Genius of Non-Judgment training. And later I will put that in the chat box, and I'll put in a code for you to do it for free. It's very powerful training. I invite you to, because that judgment, understanding the anatomy of judgment, is incredibly useful to keeping our self-esteem in a healthy way. All right, so there are pillars of self-esteem: acknowledgement, sense of uniqueness, sense of connectedness, sense of power. Today, we are only looking at acknowledgement, all right? Because it's just time constraints. So let's look first at awareness. Acknowledgement versus praise. Who would like to take a stab at what's the difference between the two of those? What do you think? Elena? You're muted.
Acknowledgement just acknowledges saying it is so, yes, no. Praise is that you lift somebody up and say that they've done a good job or it has value.
Okay, very good. Nicely done. Nicely said. I will add to that. Acknowledgement is powerful because it's usually fact-based, right? Oh, I see that you accomplished that. You finished that project 3 days ahead of the deadline. Oh, I noticed that you couldn't ride your bike a week ago, and now you're riding over bumps even on your two-wheeler. Praise is, I think you did such a good job. It's subjective of the speaker. I think that's wonderful. I think you're fantastic. There's nothing wrong with one and nothing better with the other. I will say, though, that acknowledgement lands deeper because it is based on the person's accomplishments or what they're doing. And the same thing goes for ourselves. I have an acknowledgement practice that I offer to people, is that every night before you go to bed, you think of 3 things that you acknowledge yourself for that day. They're not things that you accomplished. They're not goals achieved. It might be so much as, wow, when my son said that today, I took a breath before I responded, right? Or I didn't have that second piece of chocolate cake. Whatever. That there's an acknowledgement that is based on your measurement and things that are important to you. So acknowledgement versus praise. Or you are so great that you did this. The one problem that there could be with praise is that if somebody's telling us we're really good at it, then we're dependent on them to believe we're really good at something, rather than acknowledging our own improvement. And we're going to dig into that a little bit deeper here in a minute.
So Lisa, what came up for me is that acknowledgement is something I would generate internally, and praise is something that someone would externally generate toward me. I don't know that that's true. It's just what showed up for me.
I can see why you could look at it that way. The only difference with that, though, Dan, is that when you use acknowledgement toward others, it's powerful. Like if I say, wow, Dan, it's so great that you show up as a man here, right? That's just fantastic. We could call that praise. I would also say an acknowledgement is, Dan, that you take the time out of your day and that you have the willingness to come into a group that's solely female for the most part and share your thoughts and insights, apparently fearlessly, is really appreciated.
Thanks.
Right? So, but can you hear the difference in that?
Mm-hmm.
One of them lands because it's anchored in what really is being observed, let's say. And so doing that for ourselves is very powerful as well. Nothing wrong with self-praise. Acknowledgement goes a lot deeper, though. Equality of big and little. All right. So whether you sold the $250 million corporation or you learned how to climb a tree, doesn't matter, right? Either one of those is something you can acknowledge yourself for. Whatever got you to that point and the way that you went through that, you can acknowledge yourself for it. So there's no balance scale on big and little. And the other thing are the messages that we send to ourselves, how we speak to ourselves. And we're going to go into that a little bit further. So first of all, having the awareness of how we speak and are with ourselves in that acknowledgement. All right. Now you get a chance to talk about what you do well. Okay. Now, This is not me taking a picture well. This is the first piece of furniture I ever made. It's my desk that actually I'm sitting at right now. I never made a piece of furniture in my life, but I wanted a desk and I didn't want to buy one. And I really love maple. So I said, okay, I think I can figure that out. It's not perfect, but I love this desk. Okay. And now in the meantime, I've done a lot more woodwork and I can do woodwork pretty well. So I'd like to give you all an opportunity now. And I don't want to jump into breakout rooms because I think it will take too much time. So let's just do it in the chat box first, or if you want to just unmute, you can do it that way. What are some things you do well? Let's see a list of things you do really well, according to yourself. It doesn't matter what other people think. What do you think you do well or feel you do well? Really good at listening, Monica. Beautiful. Chrissy says, coach, crochet, organize, make things happen. Lovely. Colleen, strategy, process, procedure, speak publicly, organize things. Awesome. Deborah, educate well. Nice. Beth, pitch in to help others, coach others. Beautiful. Beautiful. Edie, I went too fast. Hold on a second. Edie, inspire and elevate others to begin more than they thought possible. Beautiful. Dan, thought leadership. It's going again faster than I could get to. Hold on a second. Stop the share so I can see the chat box. Where were we? I think I stopped with Dan, thought leadership, business strategy, exponential growth, working with men on their personal transformation, relationship with my kids. Beautiful. Monica, understand the energy anatomy of individuals. I like that. Helena, adapting, listen, see what needs to be done. Monica, connecting the dots. Beautiful. Really good at rejecting the premise. That's a conversation we could totally unpack. All right. So how does that feel? Just take a pulse of yourself when you share that. How does that feel? Angel says, nonprofit, financial management, crafts, travel, grill, teach, course supervise, the Landmark Forum. Oh, you rock, Angel. Mentor, volunteer, parent. I'm a graduate, so that's my little expletive there for congratulations. What else? Feels joyful, pride, gratitude, love. Very good. All right. Last one is something I'm finally understanding is a superpower. Yes, right? And so that feeling now from this place where you've acknowledged what you can do, can you imagine now going into a group and having them come together and do something? Right? It's a very different place within yourself when we're acknowledging ourselves. Beautiful. All right. Any comments on that before we move forward? Anything anyone wants to share? Because then we're going to get a little bit nuts and boltsy, and then before we go into our breakout rooms. No? All right.
Yeah.
Monica,
I have one.
okay.
I find it really interesting how things that I have seen as weaknesses, because I've been told I've been doing things wrong, right? That wasn't what was on the blackboard.
Right?
And now as I'm getting older, I understand that's actually a quality that if I use it right, it is a superpower. It is a skill. It is something that most people don't have. And
Yes.
that's why it didn't fit into like the school system, right?
Yes.
So I find it interesting, like the growth that you continue to do and how that shifts your perspective on yourself.
So well said. And I'm going to unpack that a little bit because it definitely leads us into the next point also. But it's important what you're pointing to is that I'm going to emphasize again the Western colonized world, because the colonized world has really moved away from nature, from having nature as our teacher. And nature's not linear. There's nothing straight or angular about it. It's process oriented. And all aspects of nature, it's like, what could you say is better, the elephant or the ant? Like, it's not even a question that you can conceive of, right? But people could probably, debate for hours of who do we need more, the engineer or the architect, right? Well, the engineer, if you didn't have him, you couldn't, well, if you didn't have the architect. right? Instead of, well, obviously we need both and we want both in the world. But our premise is that there has to be one or the other, or one is better and the other isn't. And so we have narrowed our scale, our measuring system to a very narrowly structured norm. And for the most part, I'm going to say it's random. Somewhere, someone along the line, the same thing with the IQ test, they took certain aspects and they said, okay, this is it. And now let's do a test and you're either left or right of this. And depending on where you are, you're intelligent or you're not. So if somebody, let's say, who's gone to Harvard, they may do that test and they may come out at, I don't know, genius, I think is like over 150, right? Great, 175, phenomenal. Now we take that person at Harvard and we place them in the middle of the Masai Mara, which is the wilderness steppe in Kenya. And we place them there just about dusk, feeding time for the animals, that is, right? So most likely, not that I would wish this upon anybody at Harvard, but most likely the person with that high IQ isn't going to fare very well at dusk in the middle of the Masai Mara. Okay, so that kind of scaling is not useful, but we have come to believe that's all there is. And then we measure ourselves against that. So just like you were saying in school, there's this and there's that, right? That we're measuring against instead of who we are. So that's what we're going to look at now is self-referencing. And that's what we're going to be working at also in the breakout sessions, which we're coming up to now. Okay, so let's look at self-referencing. Here we go. There we go. You can compare yourself to others, or you can be happy. You cannot do both. So if you were to fill in the blanks, what conversations do you have with yourself, right? What's the one person who's saying this, and what's the other person who's saying that? So that's option number one for the breakout group. That's option number one. You're going to have two options, and each person can decide which option they take. This is behind door number one, Vanna, and behind door number two. So this is option number one. Okay. The next one is this. Well, first of all, you are the measure. If we take yourself as the measure, so we extract, I don't want to say eliminate, but we remove our attention from those other reference points and we bring them here. Our past, our expectations, our desires, and we use ourselves as reference. So for example, last weekend I redid that. I did another tree event. I actually went all the way up the tree twice, and then I slept in there. We had boats, right? So if I look at in the last 2 months, my tree climbing skill has really improved. Now, if you compare me to the young man who was teaching me, I'm at the other end of the spectrum. But if I use myself as the measurement of that, then I have improved and I'm pleased with that. So you are the measure. You are also the reference point, and other people are the reflections of that. So to be really clear that you can self-reference, it doesn't mean you don't go out and get input from others. It doesn't mean you ignore critical feedback, but you start first with yourself as the measure. Okay? All right. And then here's the second behind door number two for your breakout, and I will put this in the chat boxes. Who do you compare yourself to? Why? What is the cost to you? And what do you really want? Like, why are you doing that?